Hello?
Kevin, how you doing, man?
Good, how are you, buddy?
Really good. This is a great connection.
Where are you at?
Welcome to Season 3 of the FNRad Snowboard Podcast.
Okay, perfect. 1 second, please.
Tala in ett meddelande efter tonen.
Hi, this is Sean. I'm not here right now.
You have reached Mike.
Hi, this is Jim. Leave me a message, and I will call you back as soon as I can.
Hi, you've reached Jeremy Jones.
Yeah, I'm going to call you back in 10. Sorry, dude.
Welcome back, listeners. So psyched. Means it's winter. It's December, and we're back with Season 3 of FNRad. It's our podcast about snowboarding where we interview interesting snowboarders. Our show runs from December to April with new episodes every Wednesday, and our latest episodes are available at Apple Podcasts, and our entire catalog is available at our website, which is like fnrad.snowboarding.podcast.blueberry.com. Just Google it or check out our Facebook page, FNRad Snowboarding, and there's a bunch of pictures of the people we've interviewed with a link to the show. This interview is a long one, and it's one of my favorites I've ever done because I've looked up to Kevin Young since I was a teenager. And by the time I moved out from Ontario, he had such a great reputation at Whistler because he's a genuinely talented, down-to-earth, solid individual who snowboards better than anyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode. All right, let's kick off the show.
Yep, totally. I moved to Whistler April 91.
Like, who was out in Whistler at that point?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about that this week sometime. I was thinking, like, I might have been the first from Ontario, or the Ontario wave of, like, being in Collingwood. There's a wild connection between Whistler, Collingwood, and even Costa Rica, just because the crew of people that worked at my shop and have since, came to Costa Rica, bought in Costa Rica, and then their friends that visited there, and now I'm in Collingwood and realize how many friends I have here that I met either through Whistler and Costa Rica, but and working with a guy who's 10 years younger than me and kind of just reminiscing a little bit. And I think I might have been the first in the wave from Ontario to Whistler. When I was looking at Snowboard Canada in the days, I was looking at like Sean Kearns, and Sean Johnson was like on the cover, I think, one of those months. And I know that was Concrete Powder.
Was that like the first place you got exposure?
The funny you say that, yeah. When I moved out west, my first year there, I don't even think I really even knew my way around the mountain. I was kind of just following a bunch of guys, and I hit this jump off of the bottom of the glacier, I think it was like a Japan straight air, and I got a photo in the magazine, and it said, the caption was, "Man, I wish I could remember this guy's name." That was in Concrete Powder. That was my first shot ever.
That's so dope.
And that was the year I moved out west, and I literally had no bearings on the mountain when I was riding around. I didn't even know where I was.
It's so big, too, and overwhelming when you...
No doubt. It was definitely overwhelming. And I went to Craig Kelly Camp the year before I moved out there, and that was my first exposure to even Sea Mountain. So it was, and to go up the glacier all the way up there over the grass and the bus over Seventh Heaven, it was just like, man, I can't imagine what this would be like in the winter. So yeah, it was amazing to go explore. And when I moved out west, I ended up meeting a lot of locals and guys that were just living there, and I basically just followed them around.
Yeah,
and didn't really... when I think back, I had no idea where I was, and some of these days I went up there by myself. I remember when I was trying to imagine where I was, picture myself on the backside of the mountain. I was like on Redline chair, and I was just like, where the hell am I? Get to the top of the mountain, I'm like, oh, okay, fuck. Here I am. I had no bearings whatsoever, and it happened on both mountains, Whistler and Blackcomb, until I just put in lots of days and started to figure out where everything was. And
yeah, there's no real alternative,
yeah.
It's funny you say that because I only went to Blackcomb. Like, you kind of just have to pick a spot that you like. I know where the wind lip is. I know where the quarter pipe is.
And the truth is that they're so big and there's so much terrain. It takes years, and I realized even going back on the mountain after riding the backcountry for a long time and kind of not riding the mountain very much at all, going back and just finding new places, or people showing me new zones, or rediscovering stuff. It's just like, holy fuck, man. Like, I've never been here, and I've been here for 15 years. What the hell? It's that big, and there's that much, you know? So
Yeah.
just visiting wouldn't be enough time to really, on short trips, you would just be scratching the surface. Even doing it for years, if you only had a week or two, you just get a glimpse, really.
This Collingwood move is in a way perplexing, but in another way, I totally get it.
No doubt.
Did you go there a lot when you were a kid?
It's the place I linked my first two turns together ever. So it's kind of coming like full circle when I think about it.
Yeah, rad.
I basically learned to snowboard on this mountain. Moving to Collingwood was not a premeditated decision. It was kind of just the universe lining things up and me kind of just going with the flow, really. And I was really, so surprised to find myself here, and that's where I started to see like, whoa, this is this weird connection between Whistler, Collingwood, and Costa Rica for me. And it's wild to be here. And it's funny, I have like Georgian Bay. It's like this little mini ocean, and then, the little piece of Costa Rica, say, and then Blue Mountain, this little mini mountain, little mini Whistler. I have like this little like mini version of these two places that I have like this strong connection to. It's kind of funny.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I realized that just driving up here originally to look at a house for rent was just like, wow, man, this fucking beautiful.
Yeah.
Ontario is a beautiful province, and it kind of took just coming here to realize it, because you kind of you move to Whistler and you're like, oh fuck, Ontario, it's flat, what the hell, why do people live there? I really felt like, why do people live there? And you move away from Whistler and you're like, wow, Costa Rica is obviously all new, and Ontario's kind of like a rediscovery, because it's a big part of my childhood. I lived in Ontario until I was 19. So, and being in Collingwood, I'm still tripping out that I'm living here. Like we rented a house. It's like a 3-bedroom hotel. It feels like, because it was fully furnished. There's nothing for rent in this town, and it's booming. It's like so much new builds going up everywhere. It's pretty wild to kind of get submersed into this place and kind of figure out what's going on, because I've been so disconnected.
Like Talisman's pretty close to where you guys are.
I had no idea. I rode Talisman as a kid. I rode Snow Valley, Horseshoe Valley, Blue Mountain. And, I'm realizing now that my bearings were all off. I had no idea really where I was going, being young and kind of just getting rides up to the hill or taking a bus. Driving to Barrie from Collingwood, where I see like sign for Horseshoe Valley and Snow Valley. I'm like, really? That's where they are? Like fucking between Barrie and Collingwood? That's trippy. It's like this little band of wrapped in ski hills, private clubs, and
And going to Collingwood was rad. They had like 1,000 runs. It was just really wide.
Yeah.
You'd take a million laps. And there was a scene there. There was like, I wonder what happened to all those guys.
Jimmy Corvesa he moved out west and then sadly passed in a car accident just after he moved to Pemberton. Was like, oh, check out my new place. And we started hanging out, and they got the horrible news that he fell asleep driving home. Kind of went straight off the road. Yeah, it's horrible. It kind of comes back in my consciousness coming here and reminiscing, Yeah, he was part of that crew, for sure.
Did you know John Greenglass?
Yeah, Meathead. Oh, yeah, I love that guy. Yeah, I saw him in Squamish when I was there a few years ago, and he spent quite a bit of time in Costa Rica when I started spending time down there. So we surfed a lot, and it's just meat now, I think. Yeah, and he was a big part of Superpipe and Al Clark at up in Brome Ridge in Squamish. So he was kind of like, really the doer and made that happen. Al was the kind of the hands-on, and he was the got the kids there. And yeah, he's a talented guy, and I really think that guy has a photographic memory, because I swear he remembers every turn he's ever made on a snowboard or a surfboard. And that guy blows my mind sometimes.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt here and tell you about our sponsors, Wired Snowboards and the Boardroom Snowboard Shop. The Boardroom Snowboard Shop is the best snowboard shop. It's got a great selection of products, guaranteed lowest price, guaranteed performance on anything you buy. And right now, Boardroom's offering 10% off and 5 off sale items if you use offer code FNRad at checkout at boardroomshop.com. So that's offer code FNRad at checkout, boardroomshop.com. They ship to Canada and the United States, and they've got the best brands. They've got tons of stock, and they're good guys. Also, check out Wired Snowboards. Rob Dow's new company. It's a Vancouver-based company. Rob's got state-of-the-art facilities. He's the inventor of some technologies that make boards ride amazing. I've got my board on order right now, and I cannot wait to get it. I got a dedicated PAL board for the Quiver, finally. And Rob has offered our listeners 10% off. Use the offer code FNRad at checkout at wiredsnowboards.com. And Rob's a good guy. Support a good company. If I can convince just 10 of you guys to buy boards from Wired, I get a free board next year. So that helps me out. Go to wiredsnowboards.com, buy a snowboard, use the offer code FNRad at checkout, and save 10% on an amazing hand-built snowboard. All right, back to the show. In the early 90s, there was this contest series at Talisman that everybody that lived in Ontario that snowboarded went to. It was incredible.
It was the off-the-wall contest. Neil Wilson, those guys really were kind of leading the scene in here anyways, even with, the gear that they had and the contests, and I looked up to them, and obviously, those contests were like the biggest thing going in Ontario at the time. And it was a big part of Talisman. That was like my fondest memories, was going there and competing. Like, what, a snowboard contest? I'll try it. All right.
But I think it was the first time I'd seen more than 5 snowboarders in the same place.
Definitely. It felt like kind of an inception point, or it was really a gathering of some sort.
Well, you talked about your first turns at Collingwood. What was that on?
At that point, I was borrowing a friend's board. So actually that year I bought my first set of skis. Like, I've never owned skis. We'd always just rent them, but my dad would take us skiing. We took lessons as a kid, and I had started skateboarding, and my best friend at the time, who's now a famous graffiti artist, goes by the tag Virus. He basically is a pioneer in the art in Canada, really. A ghetto celebrity, refers to himself. Yeah, so this guy, I would go skiing and he'd snowboard, and I thought this kid, I knew he had style and was super smooth on a skateboard, and when I saw him snowboard, I thought the same thing. I was like, holy fuck. I thought he was the best snowboarder in the world, because I barely even ever saw it. And we're hanging out with him. He was playing snow shredders and all these different snowboard videos in the day. It was like grade 9 or 10, something. I don't remember. I just remember kind of just wanting to try it, and kind of dabbled in the park and stuff like that, and then borrowed one of my friends, or a couple different friends. I tried it was a Storm, and a board I rode, which was ahead of its time. It was like a twin tip back then, and a little Swallowtail Burton Elite. It was like a 140 something. So I just borrowed these boards, and out of necessity, I came up to Blue Mountain with him, and I couldn't even ride yet. I was basically on the bunny hill trying to learn to turn, and he was like, he saw some guy from Hogtown and was like, we're gonna go do some runs. So I was like, hey, well, I'm coming. I did 2 or 3 turns on the little run, and then went up to the top of the hill and tried to keep up with these guys. And I did a front flip off of a mogul. Found myself sitting on my butt going, how the hell? I just did a fucking front flip. But trying to keep up, I learned how to turn that day and managed to keep up with those guys through the day. And that was basically my first time ever snowboarding. And after that day, I had another friend who had ordered a Burton Cruiser from Rodent Skates, which was the west end of Toronto at the time. Couldn't pay for it, so I convinced my dad to buy my skis off of me so I could buy this snowboard, and he did. Yeah, and I bought this snowboard, and that was my first board, was a Burton Cruiser, which I customized. I fucking cut the high backs. I had these wrapped around your foot. I cut them off, so they were just flat backs, and yeah, that was the only snowboard I ever bought, because then what I did was sold that to a friend. Actually, the only new board I bought, sold that board to a friend, and bought a used Burton Mystery Air off of one of the shop owner's girlfriend.
Rad.
That was a whole nother level of snowboard, which I got warranted after my first season.
Oh, nice.
And that was a year I went to summer camp as well. As I borrowed one of those, I borrowed my friend Zach had the Craig Kelly mustard kind of paint splatter. It delaminated on me, so they warranted it, and they gave me the Craig Kelly from the following year, which was, I think, the purple one.
Yeah.
I didn't really like the shape. I was like, it's kind of pointy and shit, so I ended up trading it at a shop for the Burton Air.
Which was a little more rounded, yeah.
Yeah, I like that shape better, so I But then I ended up fucking that board up. I went to slide a bench and it had a screw sticking out of it. So it went right under to my P-Tex and fucking ripped a big hole in it. I think that was the year I got sponsored. So someone gave me a board, and so I ended up, I don't even remember what I did with that board in the end, but I started riding for Powder Stick.
How does that go down?
Yeah, it was a guy named Lee. I guess he was like the team manager, and he hooked me up with those, which I had I was riding a JD Platt, I think. But then Tim Wendell came for a demo at Lake Ridge.
I went to that.
You were there. Oh yeah, I remember he rode his race board for a while. Was doing a bit of a kind of a clinic carving maybe, or people were following him around like railing. Then he went in the park after. I had already scraped the fuck out of my face. I basically did a backside air, rolled down the windows because I was like out of control. My arms ended up behind me as my face contacted the fucking granular ice snow, and I scraped my forehead, the top of my nose, the top of my upper lip, the inside of my bottom lip, and my chin. So I was just fucking the worst thing. And then I met him. But I remember watching him ride the half pipe, and that's the first time I saw someone do an alley-oop, and I was like, oh, that's fucking cool. But I was also thinking, as I saw him ride, I was thinking, I could fucking do that. Yeah. And then actually, it was in the lodge after riding that day. We're sitting at a table, and I'm basically have like Tim Wendell on one side of me and Lee on the other. And Tim's like slipping me his number, going, man, give me a call. And he basically like hooked me up with Checkered Pig that day, right in front of Lee, my team manager.
Unbelievable.
Oh God. Yeah. So that's when I started riding fucking Checkered Pig, which is kind of crazy. So when I moved out west, I had Checkered Pig boards, but luckily they had made a board that year that was all black.
I remember. Yep. That team board.
I guess, yeah. It had like a little pig on the tail. I never liked the name, obviously. I thought it was ridiculous, but and so I was pretty stoked on that.
Yeah, he convinced me on the chairlift to go to his camp instead of Craig Kelly's camp.
Oh, nice.
I had been like, I'm going to Craig Kelly's camp. That's what I told him. He said, why would you do that? You should come to my camp in Mount Hood. Mount Hood's better because it's taller. You don't have to ride a bus over some gravel. And I've got all the best pros, and then I went to my parents and I said, Tim Wendell just invited me to his camp in Mount Hood, Oregon, because he thinks I'm such a great snowboarder or whatever, which that was not a part of it at all.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they sent me to go. You went out to Whistler Blackcomb that summer with Checker Pig boards.
No, actually, I went to camp the year before that, and I got second place in the contest in the camp. And they gave me a fucking Astro deck with second place, and first place was a Craig Kelly snowboard, and I was like so bummed. But I realized I was thinking they probably thought I was riding like a Craig Kelly, brand new, one of those yellow ones, but my buddy lent it to me. It wasn't mine, but whatever. I was like, fucking second place is an Astro deck? Like, a stomp pad, man. And the guy I got first was like a fucking brand new snowboard. I was like kind of bummed. In 1990, it was Damian Sanders was doing iguana backflips over the Camp of Champions half pipe. Yeah, and there was Mike Jacoby was teaching J-tears, and Keith Wallace was there, and Brandy Sanders flashed her tits at us on the chairlift. It was definitely, and the Whistler Skate Park didn't even have its final coat. Like the way they made that park was like they poured the cement, they poured it in a couple layers, so there's like a final coat on top. It's probably why it cracks all the time, but it was in a rough state, and I swear Damian Sanders did like a backslide down the trannies a few times, and on the hill he'd be riding with these huge scabs on his back because they took us there as campers to skate the park or whatever. That's when I think Johnson was getting recognized for like ripping off the wind lip and all that stuff.
That was big.
But that wasn't necessarily in the week I was there, because I was just there for a week. I heard about a lot of this stuff that went down on the wind lip and stuff. And
how did you feel about meeting Damien back at that time?
I think I was kind of in awe of all of the pros and, just their level of riding and the idea that there was actually pros that do this for a living. So it was just like, kind of like, wow, like these guys do this for a job. Like I couldn't believe it, and so it was definitely starstruck. Craig, the kid that told me about the camp was a guy that went to my school. He had went to the camp the year before and really connected with Kelly Joe, who was Craig Kelly's girlfriend at the time.
Yeah.
When I was at the camp, we talked to her a lot, but Craig, I never really kind of, outside of like the coaching, and stretching and all that stuff that we do, I didn't really, connect with him.
Right.
Or ever did, until like, he stayed at my house, like, the year before he died or whatever. And still that guy always, I'm kind of stoked because, he's my, I don't know, I guess everything that I ever imagined to be is just always going to be that way. And it wasn't like never like meet someone and have like be let down or like, oh, he's just a friend of mine now. It's like he's I would say he was like my idol, and kind of he died that way. Still kind of held that. And I feel honored to have, whatever I did, spend time with him, like bump into him heli skiing, and get, and stuff like that and have little talks. And that guy is definitely hold him in really high regard. And I was just talking about him the other day, and then sure enough, I see this little post of maybe it's a new movie coming out with him or something. Or
yeah, it's an old movie that's been revamped.
That must have been what I saw.
Yeah, they've remastered a bunch of stuff into it looks like.
Amazing.
And he's such a Zen master, that guy.
No doubt. That guy, I love the guy. Like, and he was literally like, I imitated his style as a kid and was, had to cry when he died, like the guy was, definitely inspirational and tons of respect for the guy. Totally. And actually his last video part, I was in a band with Mark Morissette back in the day called Anon, and I wrote an instrumental part of the song. Maury wrote the lyrics, and his last video part is to a song that I wrote. So it was like fucking honored. Like I got a call after he died from his sister asking for some CDs so they wanted copies of the song, and we like sent them a box of CDs just because super honored to see him shredding to like a fucking song. Like I wrote the instrumental part anyway, so
that's super dope, dude.
Yeah, I was really stoked. I was part of snowboarding before it was mainstream. It was kind of crossing that border as I kind of was fading out of it, and I think a lot of that kind of seems to me like it kind of mirrored probably what happened in any, like the ski industry, like the big fish ate the little fish, and that was happening when I was there too, but just like fewer companies, fewer pros. It was good to see or hear that pros were getting paid well and making making in the millions, and stuff like that. It's like, well, fuck yeah, man. They should. And, in my day, you couldn't have an agent, you couldn't have a manager or anything like that. The sponsors they would just stop talking to you at that point. It wasn't even an option, and I think back, like, was that just like a way to like manipulate, young talent? But at the same time, it was such a new industry, and no matter what side of the industry you're on, if you're in the business side or on the hill, it was all new for everybody.
Right.
And I think it was just a process of figuring it out. And when it kind of reached the ranks of where the world was interested, it just kind of took a giant leap into, I guess, what more like standard professional athlete kind of program.
There's this feeling of like you don't know how good you've got it when you've got a thing like snowboarding that nobody knows about yet. And now it's 30 years later and you're like, shit, there was that time where...
Yeah.
So I consider you the first Canadian super pro, obviously. Nobody had a pro model on an international
level. Well, John Boyer.
Oh,
he was a barfoot.
Right, yeah.
And but I think he was the only one that I knew of that actually had U.S. support, because in my day, when you sent to sponsor me video or resume somewhere, they just direct you to the Canadian distributor, who would be like, oh, we could only do this or do that, and it was never through the States. We'll send you a board, or here's a pair of boots. Like I wrote for Airwalk Canada, and actually signing directly to the company in the U.S. was a big feat.
Who do you talk to talk with those guys?
Well, for me, it happened... Well, I moved to Whistler, and I initially worked as a night janitor, so I could ride all during the day. And when the winter came around, so that was during the summertime, and then working for the mountain, so I got a pass, and I could ride every day. And then that season, I got a job as a dishwasher at a Chinese food restaurant. So, again, a night job, I could ride every day. But when I got this job just by scanning the yellow pages. And they said, come on in. And they said, okay, you got the job, but it starts December 1st, but you might want to hire some friends to split the hours with. So I made it possible. I hired guys that were not aspiring pros like my other friends. And so they would want to work, while these contests were on. So I would just work nonstop until there was a contest, and I'd go take off and do a contest. So I drove down to California for the weekend and did a PSTA contest, and went to Grouse Mountain on another weekend. And so I did the OP Pro, and I was getting into the finals, and I'm standing on the podium, or at least they're announcing the top 10, and there I'm standing amongst fucking all these pros, and I have my black checker pig board, and I was getting airwalk boots while I was still living in Ontario. I got flowed boots, and that was kind of set up through the distributor or the shop Rodent Skates that where I could say I was riding for at the time. I was just a skate rat that hung out there. But so the hookup through U.S. with Airwalk happened with Lisa Hudson, who was the manager at the time, was like, hey, where'd you get those boots? Just kind of walking off the hill after the contest. And I was like, oh, I got them, from Canadian distributor. And she's like, well, you talk to me now. And I'm good friends with her brother, actually, now, who spends a lot of time in Santa Teresa, Costa Rica, and cool. And reconnected with her down there as well, and her husband. And so that's cool. That connection's still there. And she said, come to my hotel room, and gave me 2 or 3 pairs of boots and shoes and stickers. It was just like Christmas.
Remember who was on that team at that time? It was Jimmy Scott and everybody.
Yeah. It was that was my first connection with the U.S. And K2 happened the following. So that season, at the end of that season, was the West Beach Classic, and I won the pro division that year. When I moved out west in 91, I ended up 3rd in the amateur. Dale Rayberg, turns out, won the contest. I didn't know him or of him or anything at that time. He was an amateur, and he was, I think, a Burton rider. He was head to toe Burton. He won that contest. Johnson won the pro division. That season, I moved into a house with Johnson and Mark Morissette, and that's when I kind of, really kind of started pursuing the, dream of becoming a professional. And that year I entered the West Beach as pro, and me and Johnson were basically battling for the contest to the end, and I won it. I think Jamie Lynn, got 3rd or 4th, and Chris Nichols, Nick's got 3rd or 4th as well, him, or he might have. And again, Jamie Lynn you wouldn't have known no one knew Jamie Lynn at that point either. He was just kind of his inception as well, and definitely ripping and a standout, but no previous coverage or anything like that.
Yeah, that would have been a pretty big year for because MacDog came up to the West Beach Classic and then started filming with.
Yep.
All
totally,
the dog guys there.
Yeah, I followed those guys around the mountain that year and watched them film. And I remember they were hitting the quarter pipe when they told us we couldn't hit it because we'd fuck it up. Which is probably true, because I don't even know if I could make it to the top of that thing at that point. And that's when I started talking to Luke Edgar at K2. And actually, Malcolm, he was the manager at Sims.
Norman.
So
he's on my mail route. I see him all the time. Malcolm Norman.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I just randomly saw him carrying a snowboard, and I said, He's like, I used to manage the Sims team. I'm the one who signed Zelaznik.
Yeah, totally. So, he was that guy.
Was he talking to you?
Yep, and that was the summer. Superpipe was a photo shoot for Snowboarder magazine. Created this Superpipe event on Blackcomb that year in the summer, and so that's ultimately the first Superpipe was on this glacier. And it turned out a bunch of pros didn't show up or didn't want to come, late or in the summer, I guess they were over it. And so they gave an opportunity for a bunch of locals to get in there, like Mark Morissette, myself, and Sean Johnson and stuff that weren't really on the list for that thing. And that's where a lot footage, I had a little section or some shots in Project 6.
Yeah.
And that was filmed that year. But that summer, I rode a Sims board a couple days. I was talking to Luke, and they had given me a K2, and I was kind of like on the fence of like, what am I going to do here, right?
Right.
Who am I going to ride for? But it was that photo, like Sims had brought all their team up to do a photo shoot in that pipe after the super pipe thing. Well, Mark Morissette was already riding for them, but he was like, a young guy coming up, I guess, at that point. I don't remember who else was on there. I remember Palmer was there because we were sitting, it was a Sims photo shoot, and what rubbed me wrong about why I stepped away from Sims at that point was to go up the chairlift in the morning, they were handing out tickets to all the riders of the team to go up. And there was a bunch of Canadian guys there on their team, and Malcolm rolled up with like Palmer and Selaznik or whatever, and whoever else was there, and handed, gave them tickets and gave me a ticket, but we're like, oh no, didn't give the tickets to these other Canadian Sims riders. And I was just like, what? Like, what? They didn't give them tickets or made them wait or something. It was okay, no big deal. And then up on the hill, we were shooting in the Kelly part, or one of the half pipes. And then it was like, hey, we're going to go over to the super pipe and do some shots. And I was there, and they're like, we're kind of doing a one hit thing. And they told this whole group of snowboarders that were basically Canadian crew, like, no, you guys got to stop hitting it. Like, just sit there. And like, they weren't supposed to ride, but they're like, come on, Kev, come on, keep hitting it. And at that point I was just like, no, I'm not fucking hitting it. This is fucking bullshit. And at the end of that day, I went to Malcolm's room and gave him his snowboard back, knocked on his door. He opened the door and I said, here's your board. Wow. And I fucking basically decided that day that I'm going to ride for K2. And it was because how they were treating their Canadian riders, to tell you the truth. And I'm not blaming Malcolm. It's obviously the industry and in the Sims or whatever at the time. So day I was basically
had such an ego behind it, right? Like it was like, we're so cool, we're California.
I always liked them. I was just like, man, that's so lame how you're treating your Canadian team. Like I like, obviously Canada, these guys mean nothing to you. Like I don't want any part of that. And like they were kind of picking me out of the group, saying, come on, hit it, Kev, handed me the pass at the bottom. And I was just like, I'm with these guys, man. I don't know. Like, I'm not with that crew. I'm with these guys, and you're shining my fucking friends here. So that's why I was just like, pulled the pin and gave him his board back and called up Luke and was like, I'm in.
And how hyped was Luke?
I don't know. I was stoked. I was really stoked, and I started riding like the board they gave me, I really didn't like. It was an AC. It was a pointy nose and a square tail.
Yeah, the AC.
And that's when we fucking started taking our saws to them, and like my checkered pig was already rounded and customized, and we were doing that to all of our boards. We were like giving them our own shapes. And I did that to the AC, I think it was called. I don't remember. It was the green pointy K2 board I was riding it, they gave me. And they saw that summer, and they were like, send us that fucking thing. And I sent it, and that was the inception of the Juju. Yeah, when the Juju came out, it was that round, low profile freestyle board, and that came from the board that I sent them that I cut the nose and tail off of.
You would have been on there around the same time as Daniel Frank, right? The whale board?
Yep. I brought Daniel his first prototype, or his first, when I went to Stryn, Norway, it's when I met him initially and brought him a board. And he was hanging out with Ingmar Bachmann, who had no snowboard. And Burton had a demo center, and they wouldn't even give him a board to ride there. And I think because he broke his board or something. The kid was a fucking amazing skateboarder. Daniel Frank gave him his old board to ride on the mountain that year. Yeah.
How cool is that?
So you never imagine that, these guys were going to be who they became, Definitely at that point, we were just all kids, right? And literally Ingmar was like a young little kid.
Yeah.
And like, when you think about like what Burton passed up because they just, didn't know who he was, I guess, at the time. And turns out to be, like, it was probably meant to be in the end, for sure.
Well, you were on a Lion, were you not?
No, I didn't ride for Lion. Ended up riding with Ingmar on
Atlantis, pre-Atlantis.
Yeah, after Shorties. He left Atlantis while I was still on Atlantis and started a Lion, which is probably really smart because when I was on Atlantis, the owners had sold the company to Jay Joffrey. So, originally started riding for Atlantis, dealing directly, with the owners and, really stoked on the setup. I was also stoked he sold the company because he was in debt and, you know, a little bit struggling because it's screwed over by production. And the best thing about that company was Jack Coughlin, who was my team manager and a really good friend. Just like he's responsible for losing the rope off the front of the Burton Snowboards.
Right.
Well, him and his brother Andy Coughlin and him, like, he told me a story how they fucking took the rope off at a golf course where they were snowboarding, and they went back and they were already working in the factory pressing boards. They were like, Jake, man, you need to come see this. Brought him to the hill, did a bunch of turns without the rope, and the next day the rope came off the boards.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he's a pioneer in his own right, Jack Coughlin. And I think probably still involved in the industry. I haven't talked to him in a long time. I need to reconnect.
The transition from K2 to Shorties, because Shorties was like skateboard hardware, and they ran those hilarious ads, and they really were doing really, really well as a brand. How did the snowboard team come into it?
The connection with Whistler happened through Jamie Mossberg, Mouse, who is a, you know, photographer, filmer, you know, ex-professional skateboarder, and, you know, ran BBC Bad Boys Club skateboarding and was like the manager for Jeff Phillips back in the day. And his connection to the skateboard world, he would just love snowboarding and got involved with West Beach and got West Beach to sponsor one of his videos. And that's how I started filming with him and initially met him. And so he knew Tony Bualis from Shorties, and he actually helped that he got Devin hooked up with them initially. Devin was riding for West Beach, and ultimately Chip personally asked Devin to ride for them. He saw him riding on Blackcomb one day and was like, hey, you want to come to a design meeting? He liked his style, like the clothes he was wearing and stuff.
Yeah.
And they showed up at the design meeting, and Devin was a fucking ripper from day one. So Mouse, I think, made that initial connection. And then, so Devin for the first year was the only team rider for Shorties. And when they expanded, you know, through, I don't know, again, I guess Mouse and a lot, like, you know I said some really good words about Browner because I've always just loved his style, and he was young and ripping, and he got hooked up on there. And that's also, we got, right, because I loved his style, I got him on West Beach. You know, so he was riding West Beach and Shorties. And the year, I forget what it was actually the year my Pro Model came out. It was a late season release. I think it came out in January as opposed to the beginning of the season. It wasn't their first catboard, but they originally made catboards, but came out with a catboard again for the first time that year with my board, and was already designed the board for the following year. I was renegotiating my contract, and I was just not even asking for that much money. It was like very little when you think about it. And they weren't into it, I think. And it was, you know, I remember talking to him, and he said, I think I even still have the letter somewhere, something he said about, kind of knocked me a little bit in his comments, Luke Edgar. It was K2 was a corporate company. Like, it definitely had this ladder, and I felt like this disconnect between these people I knew and the roles they played in the business. So right. I think there was a bit of conflict between the team manager thinking like he was number one in the snowboard department. He couldn't imagine like a team rider getting paid more than him or something. And so I don't know, maybe he didn't feel I was worth it. And he kind of like cut me. I don't want to say he cut me up. He said something that rubbed me the wrong way. And I was talking to Mouse about the situation, getting advice, as I'm negotiating a contract here. Right.
Yeah.
But he was at the same time talking to Tony at Shorties, and he's like, well, Shorties wants you to ride for them. And after I got this letter from Luke, I was like, this is what you're telling me I'm your number one fucking rider, and this is what you pay your number one rider? That just seems so crazy. Is this what fucking Nick Parada and all these fucking guys made riding for you guys? And so basically I got on the phone with Tony Bialis and verbally was just like agreed to ride for them. I was like, said, this is like basically a conversation with said, I'm calling K2 right now and saying I'm out, because he's like, we're gonna have to take your board off the production line or whatever, kind of like threatening me at K2. I was just like, right. What happened to my friend? Luke was a friend. So I basically called him up. I said, take that board off production line. I'm out. Thank you very much. And then ended up going down, and basically that's when it started with Shorties, and that's how the Shorties became this Canadian team, which was really
young
wild.
Brown Walsh video.
Young Brown Walsh.
Unbelievable. That's so much fun, dude.
Oh yeah, those guys were geniuses. I love them both. They're just, they have their way, but definitely marketing geniuses. Yeah, so that's how that happened. I just kind of walked away from K2 at that point, and really just decided, working with West Beach too, I was dealing directly with Chip. I didn't like this corporate ladder setup. So when I started working with K2, I'd rather ride for a smaller company and deal directly with the owners and not like all these middlemen. And that's what I liked. And it's also why I rode for Atlantis after that, because I wanted to ride for the small guys. I wasn't.
So
that was my
owned Atlantis.
I can't even remember the guy's name right now, but that's also because I'm horrible with names.
Yeah.
He was a snowboarder. Yeah, he was. I'm embarrassed. Actually, I don't remember his name.
Well, let's talk about the team. It was you and Ingemar mostly, right?
Ingmar, yeah. Jacob Soderquist.
Oh, yes.
He was their other big guy, a ripper with one glass eye.
Nice.
In the beginning, there's a couple of young guys. I remember them crashing at my house. And what was the guy's name? Fuck, here I am again.
That all worked out for everybody. Like, you go to Atlantis, Devin gets that forum deal, and he just becomes like a snowboarding superstar. How close of friends were you guys, during those shorty years?
Super close. Yeah, I was never a part of the Wildcat scene. I guess right. I was kind of the older guy at that point. They were like the young. Not that I was old, but I was kind of a bit of a veteran in comparison. And they were kind of like the next generation and a little wild. And I was never really jumped into that party scene, so
you were
much.
More of a smooth operator. And Devin, he definitely didn't have to party to get a good part.
He could party and then ride the next day. I would be hungover all day. I just couldn't handle my alcohol, And those guys are just so stoked and partying. They could do that and ride and perform and feel good. And I was just like, I never want to drink again. Yeah.
What was it like being close with Sean and Sean while they're making those whiskey movies?
That was wild. And Whiskey 1 was a culmination of filming for a couple of years. And it was an idea, obviously for 2 years. It was just an idea. And Johnson got a video camera and was just filming shit.
Yeah.
Just being themselves. And it was the year, I guess it was maybe 94, we were making Child Games, and we drove down to San Diego, stayed at Mouse's house, editing that video, and Johnson and Kearns were already there logging their footage, and Mouse was helping them edit Whiskey 1.
Rad.
And so a lot of the footage, like anything with the Chris Markovich skateboarding, a lot of that bottle breaking over their heads, that all happened around the corner from Mouse's house.
Yeah, while they were down there editing this.
Yeah, exactly.
That they didn't really have enough footage for anyways.
Right. Yeah, and to tell you the truth, during that time while the editing was going on, I was like, is this legal? Are we allowed to do this? Because really there was nothing like it. I had this idea, we're going to get in trouble, or this is not allowed. TV was definitely not like it is now. The idea of MMA fighting would be unheard of, on TV back then, where now it's just normal, and, stuff like that. There's a fight scene and there's this and that, and everything they did was just man, we're going to get arrested or something. This is crazy. So they were definitely breaking rules and reinventing. I've heard people give them credit as being inventing reality TV, these guys, because they were before the CKY 2K and BAM, and I believe they were probably inspired by what Sean and Sean did. And I've had this conversation with Kearns, and he said he believes that, in the CKY movie, there was an homage to them somehow.
Yeah.
He's they're basically doing what we did minus the alcohol.
Right.
And it's basically what they did. They just basically took out the booze and kept doing crazy stuff. And, at that time, CKY 2K was coming out, there was the video called Shit and Number 2 and Boob.
Yeah.
And all that, and that's where Johnny Knoxville kind of got his inception, and that was pre-Jackass as well, right?
Yeah.
So,
did you do a Blunt magazine interview? Or?
No, I didn't. I never did an interview with them.
You would have had a big spread in Snowboard, a big one in Trans World.
I was gonna do one. I remember I was gonna do one for Trans World, and something happened. It just never happened, and kind of the opportunity passed me by. And I was like, oh, whatever.
Yeah. You never see
Kind of like, the less people know of me personally, the more it leaves open for their imagination, which is kind of cool because I've kind of felt like that when I had these ideas of people and who they are and what they were, and then I'd meet them and not necessarily be let down, but kind of just get perspective. And I was kind of like, the mystery is kind of cool too, like let people decide for themselves who they think I am, say. Or
at what point in your career does the circle happen, and how does that happen?
It was the inception happened with Mark Morissette, and it was his idea. He was involved with Special Blend before they were Special Blend, and when they were SB, and in their inception point, and he was writing for them as a writer, and then started Nubile Distribution and started distributing them in Canada, and then it turned into all their everything they did after that with Circa and Foursquare and Forum and everything. So he was distributing them and was like, let's open a store. Maury actually came up with the name, and I loved it because I just saw this idea. In my mind, it was something where we could open these all over the world in ski resort towns, and they'd be owned by their, like a professional snowboarder in their town, and kind of like, it's this, we'll create this circle around the world was the idea. So I was like, this is awesome. And that was the plan. And, so that was Maury's idea, and me and Mark jumped in there, and Anthony Vitale, and as Matt Davis, actually, another guy, a writer from Alberta, was involved in the concept from the beginning, but was kind of maybe too far detached from Whistler to really stay in, really. So in the end, it was Anthony, Mark, and myself. And just the idea was to just kind of have like a hardcore, kind of like a skate shop of snowboarding, and it was a skateboard / snowboard shop. And we kind of just felt like the little guys next to, Showcase and West Beach and all these big corporate kind of situation. And we're like, we're the little guys, but we had the connection with the Forum and Special Blend Foursquare set up. And because of our situation with Mark, we were able to really showcase the brands really well and give kids a selection to really, see and choose from their entire line, as opposed for us just picking like this jacket and that jacket and this colorway and that colorway. We were able to really showcase their brands. So that's, why Rawl and the guys at Forum and that whole scene were like what we were doing, because we represented them well, right? Yeah, so in the end, it kind of was like Mark, and his company was financing, our stock,
You never sell all your stock, so you've always got all your money tied up in stock.
Yeah, and that's when I got exposed to it, and this, this repetition of, buying, and you're always like spending money you don't have like a year in advance, kind of like trying to read the future, like what am I gonna buy? And I was just like, didn't we just do this? And then we're doing it again, like fuck. And the monotony of like, if the store kind of ends up owning you, at some place you got to be somewhere there all the time. In the beginning, well, I was still neck deep in my career, and so was Mark, so we were both traveling a lot and doing that and focusing on it. And we had, when Anthony was there, the store flourished, but when we ended up buying out Anthony at one point, him and Mark had a bit of a falling out. The store continued, but this was kind of like the beginning of our downfall, because, kind of handing over management to someone else. Me and Mark kind of screwed ourselves because we both had signing authority, and we had a manager that basically developed a drug habit that turned out that we financed by him. Basically, we were bouncing checks all over the place and we're completely unaware of it, because I'd sign a check for rent or hydro or whatever, and meanwhile those checks had bounced, and he'd hit up Mark for it, who was like, nothing out of the ordinary. Yeah, sure, I'll sign the rent check, of course. But he didn't know that I signed the fucking check already, and that bounced because this guy was just, he fucked us over. So we actually got to this point where like we were talking about, or we were actually in the process of writing a business development plan to open this, like these franchises around the world. We're going to have central headquarters for branding and ordering and everything. And we'd give an opportunity for pros to, continue their snowboard career while we manage their shop for them, or do a lot of this kind of like central management and take care of this. So these guys have something to fall into when their career's over, right?
Rad.
And that's when we realized, like, that's when we saw all these bounce checks. That's when we realized the count, like we were fucking at nothing. And then we realized all this product was missing, and he basically took it right out of the computer, and we were like, basically, if that didn't happen at that point, the company would have just died right just then and there. So luckily we were able to save it, but we were going to take the salary we were giving our manager and give it to the lawyer that was writing up our business development plan, and all of a sudden it was like, okay, that's not happening. And then I'm working in the shop, making no money at that time, having a kid, Shorty's dropping me, it was kind of like shit hitting the fan. I was just like, oh God, why is this happening? Yeah, so I ended up Mark ended up buying me out, and it had a lot to do with, him floating the stock, and 4-Star Distribution they had their year end coming up, and it turned out that this money that we owed them turned into a shareholder's loan for Mark, which meant I had to invest all this money, which I didn't have. So it was like, okay, fucking bought me out.
Yeah, and it wasn't like a hostile buyout where you don't talk to Mark anymore or anything like that.
No, well, there was a time there where I kind of had some bitterness, but in the end I was like, I moved to Costa Rica, and I was very happy, and it worked out in the end, and me and Mark are still really good friends, and there's no hard feelings, and business is business, and and I'm stoked that Steve Harris is still running the circle, and it's still the circle, and it's still doing what we at least the original concept is living strong. And I love that idea. And Mark's out, and I'm out, and it's its own entity, and it made a mark in the snowboard world in Canada, and it still is. So I'm happy in the end.
Rad.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Mountain Ambassador thing. You were a staple in Whistler for 20 years.
Yeah.
At one point, did you Mountain Ambassador for them? Or is that?
Yeah. What wasn't it? I did. It was called instructor training, and it was something that Wes Makepeace, Mike Hager, some guys were already involved with, and basically instructors that were working for the mountain, if they didn't have a lesson, or even before their lesson started, they would get paid to ride with us. You could have all your qualifications as an instructor, but doesn't mean you can snowboard, but you can't snowboard. Meaning like, we showed them around the mountain. We showed them about, riding Whistler style, and and what's around, and what to do, and what to look out for. And we basically free rode with a lot of really cool, stoked people. I got into working with the snowboard camp just kind of through those connections, and Dennis Bannock was in there, and basically the Blackcomb program was kind of consolidating a little bit. I knew that I kind of stepped back because I didn't want to take away hours from the guys that have been working there for a long time already. I didn't want to rock any boat, so I stepped aside and started working for Wintech, a Japanese snowboard camp. And my last year was when Dennis Bannock started coaching for the national team. I took his position as head coach, and that was my last season in Whistler, which I really enjoyed, because before that I would say I was definitely a selfish rider. I was in a race to get the powder. I only, don't wait for anybody, just self-consumed in riding and progression. But there was a turning point where, I don't know, I enjoyed teaching people. I enjoyed sharing, and I had more patience, and that stemmed from, not having sponsors, the shop situation it was, and me needing to pay the bills. I had a baby on the way, and then a baby came, and so it was out of necessity, and I was pulling out of the professional aspect of snowboarding. That had a lot to do with me realizing, like, man, I'm just like a skateboarder, city kid, and now I'm like in the backcountry, and like kind of looked at as like this, I don't know, person that I just felt out of place. I'm a fucking skateboarder from the city, and now I'm risking my life every day. I started getting scared for my life, losing friends in avalanches, and just put shit in perspective for me is, man, like, I do this for fun, man. I'm not a stunt man. I'm not I have nothing to prove. I lost my motivation because I realized I was, kind of intimidated by my environment, and the uncontrollable aspects of it, and avalanches, and this, progression. Just, was like, how far are we going to go here? Like, I started getting scared, really, and I was just like, I don't want to push myself in that direction anymore.
I think that's what happens. Is like, you're at the top of your game when you're young and hungry. Yeah. If you luck out and don't get egregiously injured, and you make a few great deals, and you get some great movie parts, there's no time to rest, You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Like, how do you progress when there's a shit snow year and everybody's like looking at you like, you know what? If you don't have a great part again this year, you're not in next year. And that's
Having a camera pointed at you all the time is like, it gets old. Like, you're like, I don't want to have to perform in every instance. Like, it almost like limits your time to progress even. It's like, when am I going to learn my new trick where you guys are fucking filming me right now? You know, it's like, I fucking want to just go ride and fucking do my shit. And and chasing the snow, and, you know, the season just is coming to an end, and then you're going south to the, or summer camps, and then, you know, even going to Europe pre-season. It's like the winter never ends, and you start to be like, what the fuck else is out there? You know, like you get stuck in this bubble, and the whole world is going by, and you have no idea what's going on in it, because you're just like chasing the snow around. And it's kind of how I felt. I was, you know, sometimes we would build a jump and going up there the next day, and I'm like nervous. It's like, oh fuck, you know, and it's like, this is not fun. I was like, and I'm looking at all these people driving their cars, like thinking, well, those guys aren't scared right now. They're going to sit behind a desk and do whatever. Like, I was not to say I was jealous. I was just starting to have this like new perspective. I was like, wow, man, like, am I having fun, or am I like, and like exhausted? You know, it was like more like, towards the end, it's like, oh, it's sunny, let's go, you know, let's go. And it's like, all right, I'm done. It's like, no, do it again. The light's perfect. Go again. You got to be motivated to huck yourself and hike and sled. And it's not that it got old. It was just really became, you know, it's a lot of work. I have huge respect for like Devin. Devin's like what he's accomplished. He's basically documented his snowboarding from day one. Before he was sponsored, he has a video part. Like, that guy's going to have a documentary like no one else. He could have like every year he rode, you could watch a solid snowboard part.
It's incredible. From
that kid. It is, yeah. And I respect all people who can produce in any conditions, because there's a lot that goes into it, man. Like, let alone just the rider landing the trick, but the conditions, the camera angle, the lighting, everything, you know, has to come together. That Neil Young, it's better to burn out than to fade away, or something like that.
Yeah.
That always rang true to me. It was kind of like, you know, do I need to like hold on and milk this thing, or should I just like step away, you know, and just kind of, you know, everything worked out to this point. So just have blind faith that shit will work out.
You made a big leap, and it was the Costa Rica thing.
Yeah, exactly. I started going to Costa Rica. I was like, I need to see some fucking beaches in the world. I've seen the world, but the snow, you know, and all these ski resorts and stuff. And I want to, like, what else is out there? And I went to Costa Rica and saw that beach, and I was like, okay, this is it. Like, I got the stoke for surfing that I had for skateboarding, that I had for snowboarding, and to find it again, especially going through the journey of, you know, being a professional snowboarder. Because to tell you the truth, the best of times of being a snowboarder was when I wanted to be pro. When I had that drive to just, you know, want it. It wasn't even so much the time of being pro. It was just having like that stoke that there was nothing else I wanted to do but snowboard. And so when I found that with surfing, it was like, man, I felt so lucky to find something like that. So I was just like, I want to surf. And I had never ever considered, I never competed in surfing, never had any, it was only for myself, and get to revel in that feeling of that I got to find again, that I had with skateboarding, I had snowboarding, and I got it with surfing. So it was just for me this time though. And I just dove into it and kind of was like, let's just try something new, man. It was like, I'm moving to Costa Rica with now a whole team. I got a family and a little more money in my pocket, sold my house in Pemberton and opened a restaurant in Costa Rica and bought a little piece of property and built a house and lived a simple life, and was doing that up until, you know, a few months ago. And being here right now, this is not a permanent place. It's kind of a stepping stone, and Collingwood is really just manifested because of an opportunity. My wife's a chef, and we're basically taking a dive at starting a business here. Her and some partners doing healthy food and possibly edibles and drinkables for the legal market coming up. And well, not possibly, for sure. And that's we're in the stages. We have some partners that are capable of making big things happen, and it's in that inception point. So I'm like, okay, well, let's fucking roll the dice. Let's give it a go. And here we are. And it's good for my kids. My oldest son is grade 9, 14, and they're like Crocodile Dundee, you know, they're kids from the beach that are now like thrown into the big city, and everything's new and exciting for them. So it's cool for them to have this, you know, experience being here. And if things don't work out with the business, we'll be right back down south. And who knows? Making money in Costa Rica is not easy. And that's kind of the thing, you know, we're kind of walk a fine line always of, you know, getting by, so to speak, but, you know, living a beautiful life, not really getting ahead and actually almost slowly sinking. So it's kind of time to make a move and make some money. And that's kind of what we're trying right now. We'll see what happens. Yeah, the universe has just guided us here. And I'm like, it's pretty amazing to see it happen and just be open, because happiness comes from inside. You know, has nothing to do with your environment. And yeah. I'm a happy guy, and into the adventure. I like the idea that I never planned this and never could have imagined and just find myself here. It's like, what the fuck, man? How did I get here?
That's so dope, dude.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, man, my pleasure.
Great to chat with you again.
Same, Eric.
All right. One more big thank you to Kevin Young for doing that interview. Super rad guy. So many FNRad shoutouts this episode. I'm going to start with Ricky Hauer at Timberline at Mount Hood. Thanks for the lift tickets. Timberline is one of my favorite places to ride. Their parks are always on point. They're open all the friggin' time. We went and had a POW day in October. A foot of fresh, riding chairlifts, Bluebird. Yeah, check out Timberline. It's amazing. Thanks Mike Straddle from Vans. I got a bunch of shout-outs to listeners, Kurt Whitlock, Matt Savage, George Kleckner, Kenny Hill, and Ben Ladoucier. Thanks for lending me your TB5, dude, and mailing it to me. You're a legend. Special thanks to the Facebook groups that connect me to my listeners. I'm talking about Vintage Snowboard Trader, Dig My Quiver, History of Snowboarding, and Snowboarders in Exile, and Old School Snowboard Films. Join those Facebook groups if you listen to the podcast and you're not a part of them. Lots of cool shit going on there. The DMQ gift exchange this year was run by Todd Kemp. Thanks for that, dude. Special shout out to Leslie Betts, the girl that I drew her name and had to send her stuff. She's a designer at Burton, so yeah, that wasn't challenging or anything. You got everything you ever want at your fingertips. Anyways, Leslie, I hope you liked your gift. I know you did. You told me you did. And I love mine. Thanks, Duncan Vince, for sending that to me. One last shout out to Murray Fraser in the Boardroom Snowboard Shop. Go to boardroomshop.com to get 10% off any inline stuff, 5 off any sale stuff. They ship worldwide. Boardroomshop.com. Check it out. Also check out Wired Snowboards, Rob Dow's new company. It's at wiredsnowboards.com. Come back next week for another episode of the FNRad Snowboarding Podcast, brought to you by Bike Room Productions.